A boy sits on a hillside in Judea, wiping a mixture of sweat and dust from his forehead. The sun is dropping fast, or whispered in a dimly lit hospital room. "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Most people assume this is a Hebrew poetic repetition. His calloused fingers wrap around the heavy, iron-studded head of the shebet. The comfort of Psalm 23 is not a warm sentiment. It is a promise of absolute now, unyielding defense. When David sings that he fears no evil, it is not because the valley is safe. The valley is terrifying. The threat is incredibly real. He fears no evil because he has seen what the shebet does to a skull. He has heard the heavy thud of the oak club connecting with bone. He has felt the gentle, precise tug of the mishina, pulling him back from the precipice while the shepherd fights in the dark. One tool to shatter the enemy. One tool to support the beloved. The shepherd does not promise to airlift you out of the canyon. The valley is often the only route to the high summer pastures. He promises that when the shadow falls, and when the enemy lunges, his hands are armed. Your survival is not a test of your strength. It is a testimony to his capability. But this image of the shepherd holding the weapon does not end in the lonely pastures of Bethlehem. The shebet does not stay a wooden club. Because the shepherd boy grew up to become a king, and 1,000 years later, a prophet exiled on a prison island will see the ultimate shepherd return. Two different words for the same long, gentle walking stick. We imagine a serene painting of a European Jesus holding a clean wooden pole, and when he rides through the sky, he will not be carrying a piece of oak. The Roman war machine holds the Mediterranean. The early church is bleeding out. Believers are being fed to animals in the Colosseum. John is exiled on a prison island called Patmos. He is an old man. He smells the heavy salt of the Aegean Sea. He feels the sharp, jagged volcanic rock under his bare feet. He is watching the flock being slaughtered by the wolves of empire. Then the sky splits open. A vision drops in front of him. A rider appears on a white horse. His eyes burn like a flame of fire. His robe is soaked in blood. And Revelation chapter 19 hands him a very specific weapon. It says, "He will strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron." That phrase is not a random martial image. It is a theological anchor. It is a direct quote from Psalm chapter 2. It is the shebet, the heavy shepherd's mace, only now. The weapon has evolved. It is no longer carved from the root of a desert oak tree. It is forged from unbreakable iron. It is no longer swinging at a lone predator in a Judean canyon, gently nudging a stray lamb back onto a green path. We assume the comfort comes from the gentle tap of guidance. It is swinging at the corrupted, violent empires of the earth. The Greek word John writes down on the scroll is rhabdos. This is the exact word the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament used to translate the shepherd's weapon in Psalm 23. Same tool, same purpose, absolute, unyielding defense of the vulnerable. This specific imagery makes modern readers deeply uncomfortable. We prefer the gentle teacher on the hillside. We prefer the quiet healer touching the blind eyes. We prefer the serene, sanitized painting of a shepherd carrying a clean lamb on his shoulders. We do not know what to do with a warrior king riding through the sky to shatter opposing regimes like fragile clay pots. But that discomfort reveals a modern misunderstanding of what it takes to stop actual evil. Love without the capacity to protect is just empty sentimentality. True protection requires the capacity for force against the threat. The iron rod is not a contradiction of his mercy. It is the ultimate, cosmic guarantee of it. He is not returning to negotiate terms with the darkness. He is returning to break its jaw. The Shepherd King will eventually end the long war. The predator will finally be destroyed. The flock will rest. But if you look closer at the dirt on the shepherd's sandals, at the actual predators circling the Judean ravines. But before the iron rod can shatter the nations, a profound and terrible twist must occur in the biblical narrative. Because the most shocking moment involving the shepherd's weapon does not happen in the final book of Revelation. It happens centuries earlier, in the ancient prophecies of Zechariah. And in that vision, the target of the heavy weapon is not the wolf. The most terrifying moment in the biblical narrative of the shepherd is not when he strikes the predator. It is when the blow lands on him. The prophet Zechariah stands in the rebuilding ruins of Jerusalem. The massive foundation stones of the Second Temple are barely stacked. The air smells of crushed mortar and dry dust. And he delivers a vision that seems to completely tear apart the safety promised in Psalm 23. God himself issues a command that makes the blood run cold. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. 500 years later, the true shepherd walks into an olive grove on the edge of the city. The night air is thick with the scent of crushed olives. You can hear the rhythmic clanking of Roman armor and the hiss of burning pitch from torches approaching in the dark. Jesus knows the predator is closing in. He knows the teeth are at his neck. And at the precise language David uses, you start to see something the gentle metaphor completely misses. The rod and the staff are not a poetic repetition, but he does not raise the iron mace. When the military cohort surrounds him, he does not swing the shebet to shatter the empire. He quotes the prophet Zechariah to his terrified disciples. And then he does the unthinkable. He absorbs the strike. The Roman soldiers drag him into the stone courtyard of the praetorium. They strip him. They press a crown of thorns deep into his scalp. And Matthew chapter 27 records a devastating detail about their mockery. They put a reed in his right hand, a cheap, fragile imitation of the mishina, the shepherd's staff. And then they spit on him. They pull that staff out of his hand, and they use it to repeatedly strike him on the head. The prophet Micah foresaw this exact moment centuries earlier when he wrote, "With a rod they strike the judge of Israel on the cheek." The Hebrew word Micah used for that striking rod is the shebet. The weapon meant to protect the flock is turned violently against the shepherd himself. This is not a failure of his power. It is the agonizing perfection of his love. The ultimate comfort of the gospel is not merely that God observes your suffering from a safe distance and promises to fight the wolf. It is that the shepherd willingly stepped into the jaws of the predator, allowing himself to be torn apart in the dark so the sheep could walk out of the valley alive. He became the sacrifice. They are a division of labor. If you misunderstand what the shepherd is actually carrying into the valley to secure the flock, and that violent, a beautiful reality completely reframes what it means when he brings those same tools into the valleys you walk through today. But maybe the part of this that stays with me most is not the epic imagery of a warrior king riding through the clouds. It is the calloused hand of the shepherd, holding both of those worn pieces of wood in the quiet, agonizing moments of your actual life. Because the darkness is not always a literal valley. Sometimes, the shadow of death feels like a medical diagnosis sitting on a cold, stainless steel table. Sometimes, it sounds like the sharp click of a front door closing on a marriage. Sometimes it is just the suffocating, heavy air of a depression you cannot seem to outrun, pressing hard against your ribs at 3 in the morning. If you are in a season where the terrain has turned treacherous, you need to look at what the shepherd is actually carrying into the dark beside you. We love the mishina. We love the support. When your legs give out, you lean your weight against the polished wood. You rely on the grace that holds you up when your body is trembling, and you have absolutely nothing left to offer. The mishina is the presence of a God who lets you borrow his strength when yours is entirely depleted. But we despise the shebet. We hate the heavy club when it is used as an instrument of discipline. Because the shepherd does not only swing, you will misunderstand the very nature of the comfort you are being promised. You will expect a gentle tap when you are surrounded by wolves, the mace at the wolf. Sometimes, he hurls it into the brush right in front of your feet to stop you from walking blindly off a cliff. Sometimes, you feel the sharp, bruising impact of a door slammed shut, a promotion lost, or a relationship abruptly severed. You taste the bitter ash of a plan that completely collapsed. We assume that pain is a sign of his absence. It is not absence. It is intervention. The bruise from the shepherd's rod is not a rejection. It is a rescue. He will risk injuring your pride to save your life. He will shatter your meticulously crafted idols because he knows those idols are actually predators in disguise, waiting to quietly consume you. The shebet hurts, but it keeps you in the flock. It creates a violent, necessary boundary between you and the things that want to destroy you. When you finally see both tools functioning together, the fierce discipline that corrects you and the gentle grace that sustains you, you begin to realize what David was actually doing when he wrote that poem. He was not just writing about his own sheep, he was mapping out the entire nature of God. And when you trace those two pieces of wood through the centuries, you start to see the whole biblical story stretching out from that single dark ravine. You will look for a walking stick when the darkness actually requires a weapon. This is not about ancient agricultural trivia. Picture the Judean hillside one last time. The fire dies down to glowing embers. The sheep breathe softly in the makeshift stone enclosure. The shepherd sits awake in the freezing dark, one hand resting on the polished crook, the other gripping the heavy, blood-stained oak mace. The tools never change. A fugitive stretches a piece of wood over the Red Sea, and the greatest military empire on earth drowns in the dark. A teenager carries a staff into a dusty wadi, and a predator in bronze armor falls to the dirt. A shepherd swings an iron-knotted club in the night, and the wolves are broken before they can reach the flock. A captive prophet sees a white horse split the sky, and a warrior king shatters opposing regimes with an iron mace. A mocked savior sits bleeding in a Roman courtyard, and the striking rod of the empire lands on his own cheek. The true shepherd willingly steps into the jaws of the enemy, and the sheep walk out of the valley alive. And the resurrected king reaches into the dark valleys of your own life, and the hands that gently guide you are the very hands that violently fight for you. Two tools, one fierce love. But here is the part I keep coming back to. The comfort of the 23rd Psalm is not an illusion of safety. It is about diagnosing what happens when the floor falls out from under your life, and realizing exactly what kind of God. It is the absolute guarantee of defense. The valley is terrifying. The shadow is real, and the predators are actually there. But the comfort is that you are not the one who has to break their teeth. If you are in a season where you feel completely surrounded by an anxiety that tracks you in the dark, by a grief that wants to consume you, by a crisis that feels like a shadow of death, you do not have to pretend. The threat isn't real. You do not have to fight the wolf yourself. The shebet and the mishina are already in the valley. If this opens something for you, subscribe and leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is walking through a dark ravine right now and needs to know they are fiercely defended. Pray for us as we keep digging into these ancient texts. And may the God, who has never once surrendered a single lamb to the darkness, walk with you through your deepest valley and bring you out carrying a comfort you could not have known any other way. Is walking into the ravine beside you. To feel the weight of this promise, you cannot look at the English translation, behind the jagged limestone cliffs. And the temperature is plummeting. He watches a flock of 50 sheep settling into a makeshift enclosure of piled rocks. You have to look at the two specific, violent, and beautiful Hebrew words David actually wrote down. The first word sits like a heavy stone on the scroll. Psalm kaksikumenta kolme. Verse 4. David is composing what will become the most famous poem in human history. He writes about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. A landscape so dark, the terrain itself feels like a predator. And precisely in the middle of that darkness, he makes a profound statement about what makes him feel safe. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The word our English Bibles translate as rod is the Hebrew shebet. It appears 43 times in the ancient texts, and it is almost never used to describe a walking stick. A shebet is a mace. It is a thick, brutal club, typically carved from the root of an oak tree, deliberately chosen because the base of the wood forms a dense, heavy knot. Shepherds, in the ancient Near East, would drive pieces of iron or jagged flint into that bulbous head to make it lethal. It is not designed to tap a sheep on the flank. It is designed to crush the skull of a wolf. But his hands are not resting. He is gripping two distinct pieces of wood. One is long and slender, sometimes curled at the top. It is meant to break the jaw of a lion, When David tells God that the shebet brings him comfort, he is visualizing a blood-stained weapon swinging through the dark to shatter the ribs of an attacker. Then comes the second word. The word translated as staff is the Hebrew mishina. This is the exact opposite of the shebet. The mishina comes from the Hebrew root sha'an, which means to lean, to rest, or to support yourself. This is the longer, thinner branch. This is the crook. It is the tool used to carefully lift a trapped lamb out of a rocky crevice, without bruising its skin. It is the smooth, polished wood the shepherd leans his own weary body against during a long, freezing night watch. Two distinct instruments. Two entirely different applications of physical force. Look at how these words echo through the rest of the Hebrew scriptures. The shebet is the exact word used in Psalm 2 when the anointed king is promised an iron rod to shatter opposing nations like clay pots. But the mishina is the word used in Zechariah 8, when the prophet envisions a beautifully restored Jerusalem, where old men and old women will sit safely in the public squares, each leaning on their staff for age, smoothed by years of sliding through the calloused oil of his palms. The other is short. It is thick, bottom-heavy, and violently scarred. One shatters, the other supports. That division of labor changes everything about how you read the dark valley. When we strip the shebet out of the psalm, we neuter the shepherd. We turn the fiercely protective, guardian of the flock into a passive observer with a hiking pole. But David knew exactly what it took to survive the Judean wilderness. The comfort of the shepherd is not just his gentle guidance. It is his absolute, terrifying capacity for violence against the things that want to consume you. He carries the mishina for you. He carries the shebet for the wolves. But this heavy piece of wood does not begin with David. To understand how much raw authority the shebet holds in the biblical imagination, you have to wind the clock back 400 years, to a fugitive standing barefoot in the sand. Moses stands at the base of Mount Horeb. The desert is silent. The air smells like burning acacia wood. The fire crackles. But no ash falls to the ground. God speaks. He asks one question. What is in your hand? A knot of iron-hard oak forms the head, and it is stained with dried blood. Every shepherd in the ancient Near East carries them. Moses looks down. A staff, a piece of dried wood, polished by sweat, scratched by the jagged rocks of Midian. He is 80 years old. His skin is leathered by the sun. 40 years in the wilderness have stripped him of his royal titles. The Prince of Egypt is gone. He is just a herder. He carries the tools of a herder. God gives a command. Throw it on the ground. Moses throws it. The wood hits the dirt. The shape twists. The branch writhes. Scales materialize. A hiss cuts through the dry wind. A venomous serpent coils in the dust. Moses runs. God speaks again. Put out your hand. Catch it by the tail. He reaches out. His calloused fingers touch cold scales. The spine stiffens. Bark returns. It is wood again. This is a terrifying sequence. It is meant to be. Pharaoh has chariots. Pharaoh has bronze spears. Pharaoh has legions of archers. Moses has a shepherd's stick. But God is taking the tool of a shepherd and turning it into an instrument of empire-breaking power. When Moses walks back into Egypt, he does not carry a sword. He carries the wood. He raises the staff over the Nile. The water turns to blood. The smell of copper fills the city. He stretches it toward the sky. Two specific tools, hanging from the same leather belt, meant for two entirely different scenarios. You see them in the hands of a fugitive prince. Deafening thunder shakes the stone palaces. Hail shatters the crops. He points it into the wind. Darkness falls so thick it can be felt on the skin. He lifts it over the Red Sea. The salt water tears apart. The seabed turns to dry land. A nation walks through. Then the rod sweeps down. The water collapses. The greatest military force on earth drowns in the dark. The rod is not a piece of dead wood. It is the extended arm of Yahweh. This is the shebet, scaled up to cosmic proportions. It leads the Israelites like a flock of sheep out of slavery. That is the guidance. but it absolutely crushes the skull of Pharaoh's empire. That is the weapon. When Israel sings their song of deliverance on the other side of the sea, they are praising a God who shepherds them, but who also fights for them. One hand guides, one hand strikes, but a staff raised over an ocean is a distant national victory. It is massive. It is political. Centuries later, another shepherd will carry these tools into a much more intimate, bloody fight. And this time, he will not be facing an empire. He will be walking into a valley to face a single, terrifying man, wandering the Sinai desert. You see them carved into the colossal stone reliefs of Assyrian kings. You hear them spoken of by prophets. The story of David and the giant is perhaps the most universally recognized underdog narrative in human history. We use it as a cultural shorthand to describe corporate mergers, political upsets, and impossible athletic victories. When we visualize the scene, we almost always picture a small boy holding a flimsy leather sling and a few smooth river stones. But if you analyze the historical account in 1 Samuel, chapter 17, there is a detail in the weaponry that changes the entire psychological texture of the encounter. David refuses the heavy bronze armor of King Saul, and he completely rejects the traditional iron sword. Instead, the text tells us exactly what he carries down into the dry, dusty gravel of the wadi. He gathers the 5 stones. But before he does that, the scripture explicitly notes that he takes his staff in his hand. The Philistine champion, standing over 9 feet tall and encased in overlapping bronze scales that weigh over 100 pounds, looks down at the Judean teenager, and the giant is deeply insulted by the equipment. He yells across the valley, his voice echoing off the limestone walls. "Am I a dog, that you come to me with sticks?" Standing in the ruins of Jerusalem. Same tools again and again. You have almost certainly heard the phrase, Goliath sees the shepherd's wood. He recognizes what it is used for, and his military pride is profoundly offended. David's choice of weaponry is an intentional, theological statement to the surrounding armies. He is not stepping onto the battlefield as a soldier. He is arriving as a shepherd. The Philistine represents the ultimate apex of human, technological violence, wielding an iron spear shaft thick as a weaver's beam. David, by contrast, is bringing the tools of the pasture into a military theater. A staff is what you use to beat away a scavenging animal. David is not treating Goliath like a rival military commander. He is treating Goliath like a wild predator that has come down from the hills to steal the flock of Israel. If seeing these ancient encounters through their original historical lens is stirring up a hunger for more, you're exactly who this channel is for. Hit subscribe and leave a thought in the comments. Because every week, we peel back the layers of the text to find what is hiding in plain sight. So the young shepherd walks down into the ravine. He uses the sling, the traditional ranged weapon of the ancient herdsman, to drop the predator before it can strike. It is a stunning, asymmetrical victory that instantly elevates him to national hero status. But that victory in the Valley of Elah is only a historical preview. Even if you have never opened a Bible, you have likely heard the 23rd Psalm read aloud at a graveside. It points forward to a much deeper, much more terrifying valley that an older, more weary David will write about years later. A valley where the predator waiting in the dark is not made of flesh and bronze. The sun drops behind the jagged crags of the Judean wilderness. The temperature plummets. The path narrows into a ravine so deep the sunlight cannot reach the bottom. This is the Psalm of Eth, the valley of deep darkness, the valley of the shadow of death. The sheep press together. You can smell the dust and the lanolin in their wet wool. The limestone walls are sheer and freezing to the touch. The sound of pebbles sliding down the steep slope echoes in the narrow, claustrophobic corridor. Something moves in the dark. A low growl vibrates through the stones. A predator has tracked the scent. It is hungry. It is waiting for the straggler. The sheep do not have fangs. The sheep do not have claws. The sheep have no camouflage to hide them against the pale rocks. They are entirely defenseless against the teeth waiting in the blackness. But the shepherd steps between the flock and the threat. He does not speak a gentle word to the predator. He does not negotiate with the lion. He reaches down to his leather belt,